Beth Smith has lived her whole life, staring into reflections that never agree with her. In some, she's the gifted daughter who inherited her father's brilliance. In others, she's the lonely woman who never learned how to stop chasing his approval. She's a mother, a surgeon, a daughter, a clone, and beneath all of that, a question with no answer. Who is Beth Smith when she's not performing for the people who made her? The tragedy is that she doesn't know, and she's terrified to find out. The sadness of Beth begins where reflection becomes confusion, when you can no longer tell if what you're seeing is pride or emptiness. Beth grew up orbiting a black hole named Rick Sanchez. His genius, his charisma, his chaos, they filled every room, consumed every silence, and shaped every thought that passed through her young mind. He didn't have to tell her she wasn't enough. The gravity of his presence did it for him. She wanted to be him, to understand him, to impress him, but she also wanted to be free from him. That contradiction is the foundation of her life, the longing to escape her father's shadow while still needing his light to feel real. She loves him the way only a child of neglect can, deeply, painfully, and without the ability to stop. Her sadness isn't just that her father left, it's that he came back. When Rick re-enters her life, he brings the promise of validation wrapped in the certainty of destruction. For years, Beth had built herself around the absence he left behind. She became capable, disciplined, sharp, a person who could hold her own because she had to. But when he returns, all that strength trembles. His approval still matters. His voice still defines the limits of her self-worth. It's like she never grew up, just learned how to pretend she did. The mirror that doesn't lie is the one Rick holds up. He reflects back the worst of her, the arrogance, the detachment, the emotional cruelty she thought she'd outgrown. He doesn't do it to help her. He does it because it's all he knows. He reduces every attempt at love to a psychological equation, every human connection to weakness. And Beth, without realizing it, starts to see herself through that same distorted lens. Every time she chooses family over freedom, she wonders if she's being strong or pathetic. Every time she shows compassion, she hears his voice calling it a distraction. Rick doesn't have to destroy her self-image. He just has to be in the room. Beth's sadness is the sadness of recognition. The realization that the parts of her she hates most are the parts she inherited. Her impulsiveness, her need for control, her refusal to admit vulnerability, they're all reflections of him. She's her father's daughter in every way that hurts, and she knows it. That knowledge doesn't bring pride, it brings nausea. Because loving him means forgiving herself for being like him, and she isn't sure she can. Her relationship with Jerry adds another layer to that reflection. If Rick is the mirror that exposes her, Jerry is the mirror that forgives her. With him, she can feel needed again. His weakness makes her strong. His dependence makes her relevant. She doesn't love Jerry because he completes her. She loves him because he confirms her. He makes her feel like the person Rick never let her be, important. But even that comfort is poisoned by awareness. Deep down, she knows she's with him not because she wants to grow, but because she's tired of being invisible. Loving Jerry is easier than facing herself. There's a peculiar cruelty in how Beth defines her worth. Every achievement is measured against an imaginary standard set by a man who doesn't believe in standards. She can perform surgery, raise children, navigate emotional landmines, but none of it matters if it doesn't impress her father. She doesn't live to experience life. She lives to prove that she can handle it. Competence becomes her religion, control her prayer. And yet, no matter how precise she becomes, she never feels clean. Because control can't cleanse pain, it only delays it. Beth's sadness grows in the spaces between control and collapse. When the house is quiet, when the kids are asleep, when Jerry is too tired to talk, that's when the truth crawls in. She realizes she doesn't know how to rest. She doesn't know how to exist without performing. Every second of stillness feels like judgment. Every pause feels like the moment before abandonment. She can face chaos better than peace, because chaos at least feels like home. Rick's influence is not her only inheritance. She also carries his emptiness, the unbearable sense that love is a transaction and that happiness is a lie people tell themselves to avoid seeing the void. She tells herself she's smarter than that she's emotionally evolved. But when she looks at her children, she feels the same fear her father felt. The fear of passing down the infection, of watching the same loneliness grow behind their eyes. She tells them to dream, to be strong, to love freely, all the things she can't seem to do. She's terrified of becoming the reason they learn to hide. And yet, there's a strange beauty in Beth's sadness. It's the beauty of awareness. She knows exactly what she is. She doesn't hide behind ignorance. She's not blind to her contradictions. She studies them. That self-awareness, though painful, gives her depth that no other character in her world possesses. She feels every fracture within herself and doesn't flinch from it. Her sadness is not weakness, it's clarity. The understanding that being alive means being unfinished. The mirror that doesn't lie isn't cruel, it's honest. It shows Beth not what she wants to be, but what she is. And that's the beginning of growth. She starts to see that maybe she doesn't have to choose between being her father's daughter and being her own person. Maybe she can be both, a hybrid of brilliance and tenderness, control and chaos. She'll never escape the reflection entirely, but she can learn to live beside it. The sadness remains, but it stops being punishment and starts being truth. By the time Beth begins to accept her reflection, she realizes that the mirror doesn't judge. It only reveals. The judgment was always hers. Her sadness was never about what Rick did to her or what Jerry couldn't give her. It was about what she couldn't give herself. Forgiveness. Forgiveness for being human, for being flawed, for wanting more than logic says she deserves. And when that forgiveness finally begins to flicker, something inside her softens. The reflection doesn't change, but her gaze does. Beth's sadness is the price of self-awareness. It's the ache of knowing you're both victim and villain, child and parent, mirror and shadow. It's the understanding that every attempt to escape your past only proves how deeply it owns you. But within that ache lies freedom, the freedom to stop running, to stop blaming, to stop searching for perfection in the reflection. Because maybe meaning isn't found in becoming someone new. Maybe it's found in looking at the reflection and saying, "This is me, and that's enough." Beth Smith does not chase happiness. She chases precision. Every move, every word, every decision is a calculation designed to prevent collapse. To anyone else, her life looks composed. A stable home, a professional career, a sharp mind. But that composure is not peace. It is armor. Beneath it lies a constant hum of self-surveillance, a whispering reminder that any small crack might prove she is not perfect after all. Beth's cage was never built by Rick or Jerry or the chaos of the universe. It was built by the version of herself she decided she had to be to survive. Perfection is her inheritance, the invisible standard she absorbed from her father's impossible mind. Rick never asked her to be perfect, but his presence made imperfection unbearable. When your father can build universes, how do you justify struggling to hold your family together? When your father dismisses emotion as weakness, how do you admit that you're lonely? Beth learned early that love in her world was conditional, not because anyone said it was, but because she could feel it vanish when she disappointed someone. Perfection became her only safe language. It was how she apologized without speaking, how she begged for affection without looking desperate. Her sadness begins to grow from that need for perfection. She believes that if she can keep everything in balance, the house, the children, the image of competence, she can finally control the chaos her father represents. But perfection is an endless equation. There is always a variable she cannot predict, a flaw she cannot hide. Each small failure becomes a personal indictment. When the glass breaks, when Jerry forgets something, when Rick's sarcasm cuts too deep, she blames herself. She has turned life into a test she can never pass. The cruelest part of the cage is that it's made of things that look like strength, discipline, composure, logic. These are the bars she built and then mistook for virtues. She doesn't rage like Rick or collapse like Jerry, she maintains. But maintenance is its own kind of despair. It's the quiet suffering of someone who can't let go without feeling like they're falling. She convinces herself that control is love, that fixing things is the same as caring, that predictability is peace. Yet every controlled moment feels emptier than the chaos she fears. Perfection also isolates her from her own children. She loves Morty and Summer deeply, but she doesn't know how to show them love that isn't filtered through performance. When they struggle, she sees her own weakness reflected back. Instead of comforting them, she instructs them. Instead of listening, she manages. Because to admit that they can fail safely would mean admitting that she can too. Her perfection, meant to protect them, becomes a barrier between them. They love her, but they don't confide in her. She provides security, not warmth. And though she tells herself that's enough, it isn't. Not really. Beth's cage is mirrored in her marriage. Jerry's softness once gave her a sense of balance. His need for her made her feel capable, in control, almost divine. But perfection cannot coexist with dependence for long. When Jerry's flaws become too visible, Beth's patience turns to resentment. She begins to see him not as a partner, but as a reminder of everything imperfect about her life. His existence disrupts her illusion of mastery. She criticizes him not because she despises him, but because she despises the vulnerability his presence forces her to feel. Jerry's mediocrity exposes the truth Beth is trying to suppress, that perfection cannot protect her from emptiness. Rick remains her greatest mirror and her greatest wound. When she looks at him, she sees both the source of her perfectionism and the evidence of its futility. Rick is perfection without peace, intellect without joy, control without meaning. He has mastered the universe, and it has given him nothing. That realization should free Beth, but it doesn't. Instead, it deepens her confusion. If her father's mastery led to misery, then what hope does she have? She's trapped in the same loop, chasing an ideal that promises salvation but only delivers exhaustion. The cage of perfection is built on the lie that control equals safety. But life, as Beth slowly begins to realize, doesn't work that way. Perfection doesn't prevent pain, it just postpones it. Every mistake, every emotional crack finds a way to leak through. The children grow distant, Jerry grows small, Rick remains unmovable, and Beth, despite all her effort, still feels the same emptiness she did as a child, the emptiness of waiting for approval that never comes. The realization terrifies her. If perfection can't fix it, what can? There's a moment, brief and almost imperceptible, when Beth starts to see the cage for what it is. She catches herself apologizing to no one, just out of habit. She hears her voice rise at Jerry and stops halfway through the sentence. She feels the exhaustion that comes not from work, but from pretending she isn't tired. These small moments are cracks in the structure, and through them she begins to glimpse something unfamiliar, the possibility of being imperfect and still being enough. The sadness of Beth's perfection is that it was born from love. She wanted to be perfect, not to impress, but to protect, to prove that she could be the stability her father never was. Every rule she made, every standard she upheld, came from the belief that control could make people safe. But love, built on control, is love without softness, and she knows this now. She sees it in the way Morty flinches under pressure, in the way Summer hides her hurt behind sarcasm. Her perfection has reproduced the same fear she inherited. The cage doesn't end with her, it expands. What makes Beth tragic isn't that she fails to be perfect, it's that she keeps trying long after she knows it's killing her. The mirror that once drove her toward greatness now reflects her fatigue, and in that fatigue lies the beginning of freedom. Because perfection cannot coexist with awareness, the moment she admits she's tired of being perfect, the walls of the cage begin to bend. It's not collapse, it's relief, the slow exhale of a woman who's finally realizing that no one is watching anymore and that she doesn't need them to be. Her sadness transforms into clarity. She starts to see that perfection was never the goal. Survival was. And survival, at its core, doesn't require control. It requires adaptation. She doesn't have to become flawless to be strong. She doesn't have to fix everything to love it. She doesn't have to hold everything together to belong to it. This understanding doesn't erase her pain, but it reframes it. The cage of perfection becomes less a prison and more a reminder of how hard she tried to love, in the only way she knew how. When Beth finally stops fighting imperfection, she doesn't become happy, she becomes real. And being real, after years of performance, feels like freedom. The sadness doesn't disappear, but it loses its power. It no longer tells her she's failing. It tells her she's alive. Control haunts Beth Smith like an old memory that never fades. It doesn't shout or demand, it whispers. It tells her that everything can stay together if she just holds on a little tighter, plans a little better, speaks a little softer. She listens because she doesn't know how not to. Control has become her invisible ritual, the only thing separating order from collapse. But the truth she refuses to face is that control isn't a shield, it's a ghost. It gives the illusion of presence while leaving her more alone than ever. Beth learned control as a form of survival. When her father vanished from her childhood, he left behind not only absence, but chaos. Rooms that once felt bright became unpredictable. Love became a shifting thing, too intense, then suddenly gone. Her mother's patience thinned, her world turned uncertain, and in that vacuum, Beth discovered control as comfort. She couldn't stop people from leaving, but she could stop herself from breaking. Control was her first invention, her way of building meaning out of disorder. As an adult, that instinct remains, but it has changed shape. Now she doesn't just control her emotions, she controls her environment. The way the house looks, the tone of her voice, the rhythm of her family's life. Every detail becomes a battleground where she fights for peace through precision. She doesn't yell because she's angry. She yells because she's terrified. Every argument with Jerry, every correction she gives to Morty or Summer is a negotiation with panic. She isn't trying to dominate them. She's trying to convince herself that she still knows what stability feels like. But the ghost of control never stays quiet. It shows up when she least expects it, when the house is calm, when she should feel safe. It asks her to look closer, to find the thing that's wrong, to fix the thing that isn't broken. It tells her that peace is just the pause before failure. She starts to anticipate disaster, rehearsing her responses before it even arrives. And in doing so, she loses the ability to experience the present. Every moment becomes a simulation, a projection of what could go wrong. The ghost doesn't possess her. It convinces her to possess herself. Her father's return only feeds the haunting. Rick embodies the illusion of control, perfected, mastery over physics, time, and death itself. But his control is an act of desperation, a refusal to feel. Watching him, Beth feels both awe and dread. She recognizes the pattern, the endless pursuit of stability through dominance. Rick controls the universe the way Beth tries to control her family. They both believe that control is the antidote to pain, when in reality, it's the form pain takes when it refuses to heal. Jerry, in his own quiet way, becomes her mirror again. His lack of control enrages her, not because it hurts her, but because it tempts her. He drifts, he accepts, he fails, and somehow he survives. He doesn't carry the ghost that she does. His ability to surrender feels like a kind of wisdom, one she envies but can't admit to needing. When she criticizes him, she's not punishing his weakness, she's punishing the freedom he represents. His chaos is unintentional, but to her, it's dangerous, because it proves that life goes on without control. Beth's control extends even to love. She manages affection the way she manages the rest of her life, through boundaries, through expectation, through analysis. When she says, "I love you," it's not a confession, it's a calculation, a declaration meant to preserve structure. She fears love's spontaneity because it's uncontrollable. Love doesn't obey rules, and that terrifies her. True intimacy, the kind that requires vulnerability, feels like walking into a room without knowing where the exits are. So she keeps her affection neat and her emotions filtered. Her family sees composure. They don't see the fear trembling beneath it. Control also isolates Beth from herself. She doesn't know what she feels until she's already decided what she should feel. If she's angry, she rationalizes it into responsibility. If she's sad, she reframes it as fatigue. If she's happy, she looks for the flaw that will end it. The ghost whispers through every emotion, turning sincerity into performance. She mistakes numbness for strength, distance for discipline, and though she tells herself she's in control, what she's really doing is disappearing, piece by piece, choice by choice. The tragedy of Beth's control is that it was born from love. Every rule, every expectation, every overreaction, they're all attempts to protect what she values most. Her control is not cruelty, it's fear in disguise. She wants to keep her family safe from the chaos that shaped her, but in doing so, she recreates it. The children grow cautious around her. Jerry grows apologetic, and the home begins to hum with quiet tension. The ghost has moved from her mind into the walls. But awareness, once it arrives, cannot be undone. Slowly, Beth begins to see what control has cost her. She sees it in the way Summer avoids emotional topics, in the way Morty hesitates before asking for help. She realizes that the stability she built feels more like surveillance to those she loves. Her control didn't create peace, it created pressure, and that recognition hurts, not because she failed, but because it means she must unlearn the only language she's ever trusted. Letting go doesn't happen quickly. It's messy, uneven, full of relapse. There are moments where she tries to relax and ends up panicking instead. where she lets things fall apart and then rushes to rebuild them before the silence becomes unbearable. But there are also moments of grace, small, trembling instances where she lets imperfection breathe, a dish left unwashed, a conversation that doesn't go as planned, a night where she allows herself to feel loved without deserving it. These are her first real victories, invisible to everyone else, but monumental to her. The ghost of control never fully leaves. It lingers, waiting. But over time, its voice loses authority. It becomes background noise instead of command. Beth starts to understand that control was never about power, it was about fear. Fear of losing, of being left, of realizing she was never in charge of anything. Once she stops fighting that fear, she finds something better than stability. Trust, not in others, but in herself. The trust that even if things fall apart, she will still exist. Control, when seen clearly, becomes compassion. Beth begins to soften, not because she's less disciplined, but because she's finally honest about what control was protecting. She learns to forgive herself for the years spent trying to fix the unfixable. She realizes that the ghost was never her enemy. It was the part of her that wanted safety so badly, it forgot what safety actually was. The ghost fades when she finally tells it the truth. That safety isn't in control, it's in acceptance. By the time Beth can look at her life without the urge to manage it, she's no longer haunted, she's human. The world hasn't become less chaotic, but her need to conquer it has. The ghost still whispers, but now she smiles at it. She lets it speak, then lets it go, because the only real control she ever needed was the courage to stop pretending she had any. Beth Smith's emptiness didn't begin with her. It was passed down, like an heirloom no one asked for, shaped by generations of quiet disappointment and unspoken fear. It's not the emptiness of a lack, not hunger, not loneliness, not grief, but something more abstract, more insidious. It's the emptiness that comes from awareness without direction, from being intelligent enough to see the flaws in everything but too human to stop caring anyway. Her father lives with that same void, but where Rick masks it with genius and chaos, Beth masks it with structure and control. The difference between them is only in expression. The core is the same. Her emptiness began in childhood as an echo. When Rick left, she filled the silence with imagination, with curiosity, with the idea that she was destined for something bigger. The problem is that destiny never arrived. She grew up, learned responsibility, learned restraint, but the part of her that believed she was special never stopped waiting. Every success she achieved felt smaller than the promise she remembered. Every joy felt temporary. She mistook that sensation for ambition, when in truth it was the early hum of emptiness forming its home inside her. Beth's adult life is built around this quiet inheritance. Her achievements don't satisfy her, they only delay the ache. She is capable, intelligent, respected, yet every victory feels hollow the moment it's complete. She tells herself she's just restless, that she needs a new challenge, a new project, a new version of herself. But it's not boredom she's fighting, it's vacancy. The same emptiness that drives Rick to destroy worlds drives her to perfect her own. She creates order to keep from hearing the silence inside it. That silence is not absence, it's awareness. The kind of awareness that asks, is this all there is? The question comes when she's alone, when the house is dark and quiet, when the children are asleep and Jerry's breathing beside her. She stares at the ceiling and feels the weight of it pressing down, not sadness, but something flatter, colder, more matter of fact. She loves her family. She loves her life, but the love doesn't fill her. It just moves around the emptiness, like light around a void. Her father's return only deepens the echo. Rick's presence amplifies what she's spent years trying to quiet. He embodies the proof that knowledge doesn't heal, that understanding doesn't satisfy. He's the future of her own emptiness, the logical endpoint of trying to fill meaning with intellect. Watching him is like watching her own possible fate. It terrifies her because it's not dramatic, it's ordinary. Rick isn't suffering because of the universe's cruelty. He's suffering because the universe finally gave him everything he wanted, and it still wasn't enough. Beth knows that feeling. It's the same one that creeps in after she fixes something, after she resolves a conflict, after she's right. Emptiness disguised as victory. Beth's emptiness also infects her relationships. With Jerry, it takes the form of frustration, not because he fails her, but because his simplicity exposes her. He's content with mediocrity, with routine, with imperfection. He doesn't need to fill the silence because he doesn't hear it. To Beth, that contentment feels like blindness. How can he not feel the absence she feels? How can he sleep so easily in a world that refuses to make sense? His peace feels like an insult to her intelligence, and yet she envies it. She envies his ability to be satisfied, his ability to find meaning without having to earn it. Her children inherit echoes of this emptiness, though she tries to hide it from them. She teaches them to be strong, to be independent, to think critically, but she doesn't teach them how to rest. She tells them they can be anything, but never tells them it's okay to be nothing sometimes. Her love, though, sincere, becomes another form of pressure, the same pressure she inherited from Rick's shadow. She doesn't want them to be empty, but by demanding they always be more, she ensures they will be. Emptiness, after all, isn't born from failure. It's born from the inability to stop striving. The inheritance of emptiness is not a curse in the supernatural sense. It's a habit of thought, a learned blindness to the present moment. Beth's mind is always somewhere else, in the next goal, the next repair, the next apology. She cannot simply be, because being reminds her of the hollow space inside. She's not unique in this. It's the human condition magnified by awareness. Most people fill their emptiness with distraction. Beth fills hers with responsibility. She doesn't drink or run or escape like Rick. She builds and manages. Her addiction is control, and her drug is productivity. But when the noise quiets, the truth always returns. She's still unsatisfied, and she doesn't know why. There's a moment, not catastrophic, not cinematic, when Beth finally faces the emptiness directly. It happens in stillness, maybe in a late-night conversation, maybe in a moment of silence at the dinner table. She looks around and realizes that nothing is missing, yet something still feels absent. And for once, instead of trying to fix it, she lets it be. The silence doesn't roar, it settles. She sees it not as a flaw, but as part of herself. The space inside her isn't a void to be filled, it's the room where meaning is allowed to grow. Rick has never reached that point. His emptiness consumes him because he denies it. He treats it as an error to be corrected. Beth's tragedy and eventual wisdom is that she starts to see what he can't. Emptiness is not an enemy. It's the space between moments, the breath between words. It's the proof that we're aware enough to feel the gap between who we are and who we want to be. The more she stops resisting it, the more she begins to understand her father, not as a monster, but as a mirror. His genius was his way of outrunning the same thing she's learning to sit with. Beth's sadness doesn't disappear when she accepts her emptiness, but it changes shape. It becomes softer, quieter, less consuming. She stops expecting life to provide meaning and starts allowing herself to create it. She finds it not in achievement, but in connection, in the way Summer laughs, in Morty's fragile optimism, even in Jerry's clumsy affection. The emptiness remains, but it no longer defines her. It becomes the backdrop that makes love visible. The inheritance of emptiness is not a legacy to be broken, it's a truth to be understood. Rick passed it down because he couldn't face it. Beth carries it because she can. And maybe that's what evolution looks like, not escaping the void, but learning how to live near its edge without falling in. The silence she once feared becomes a kind of peace. The same emptiness that once made her restless now reminds her that she's alive. At night, when she stands by the window like she used to as a child, she doesn't look for answers anymore. The stars no longer mock her, they just exist. She feels their distance, their coldness, their indifference, and instead of despair, she feels belonging. Because she understands now, emptiness isn't the absence of meaning, it's the space where meaning can breathe. And for the first time in her life, Beth Smith allows herself to breathe with it. Guilt is the quiet pulse beneath Beth Smith's composure. It doesn't crash like anger or ache like sadness. It hums. It hums through her words, through her silences, through the way she grips the edges of control, even when she knows it's hurting her. Her guilt is not about specific choices, not about any single failure as a mother, wife, or daughter. It's something deeper, more structural, the sense that she is somehow responsible for the emotional weather of everyone she loves. If they suffer, she has failed. If they drift away, she has caused it. Her guilt is not an emotion, it's an identity. It began early, when her father disappeared and left a hole in the shape of a question she could never answer. Why wasn't I enough to make him stay? She never spoke that thought aloud, but it lived beneath every decision that followed. She decided that love must be earned through usefulness, that affection could be maintained through competence. The child who couldn't keep the father from leaving, grew into a woman who believed her worth depended on holding things together. Guilt became her inheritance, the invisible thread tying her to the chaos that defined her childhood. When Rick returned, the guilt flared like an old wound reopening. She wanted to be angry, to reject him, to confront him for the years of absence. But the moment he walked through the door, all that fury collapsed into submission. She was his daughter again, brilliant, capable, hungry for approval. Every word he spoke carried the weight of judgment. When he mocked her, she laughed to hide the sting. When he praised her, even accidentally, she carried it like sacred text. Beneath her resentment lived a simple truth. She forgave him too quickly, not because he deserved it, but because guilt convinced her she was the one who needed forgiving. Beth's guilt extends to her role as a mother. She loves her children, but love is never clean for her. Every mistake she makes, every outburst or missed moment becomes another tally on an invisible ledger she will never balance. When Morty stumbles, when Summer withdraws, she feels their pain as a reflection of her own inadequacy. She measures herself by their happiness and always finds herself lacking. The tragedy is that she confuses responsibility with guilt, as if nurturing others means being accountable for every shadow in their lives. It's an impossible standard, but she keeps it anyway. Jerry's presence amplifies this cycle. She feels guilty for loving him, and guilty for not loving him enough. Guilt for staying when she dreams of leaving. Guilt for leaving when she needs to stay. Their marriage becomes a pendulum of remorse, each swing another reminder that she cannot exist without disappointing someone. When Jerry fails to rise to her expectations, she blames herself for expecting too much. When he tries to rise and still falls short, She blames herself for making him feel small. Every argument ends the same way, silence thick with self-reproach. Rick, meanwhile, never feels guilt the way she does. He intellectualizes it, dissects it, jokes about it. To him, guilt is a flaw of emotional engineering, a bug in the code of consciousness. Beth envies that detachment, but she also sees what it costs him. His freedom from guilt has stripped him of empathy. He can't love without analyzing it, can't regret without mocking it. Beth carries the opposite burden. She feels everything too much, takes ownership of every emotional ripple. Between them lies the spectrum of human suffering, Rick's apathy and Beth's over-responsibility. Both are ways of avoiding helplessness. Beth's guilt often disguises itself as morality. She tells herself she's driven by ethics, by duty, by love. But underneath those noble words is the desperate need to quiet her own conscience. Every act of care becomes an act of compensation. When she helps someone, she's not just helping them, she's proving to herself that she's still good. But goodness defined by guilt is never sustainable. It feeds on itself. The more she gives, the emptier she feels. And the emptier she feels, the more she gives. She becomes the architect of her own exhaustion, mistaking depletion for virtue. The anatomy of guilt is circular. It has no beginning or end, only motion. It turns memory into judgment, love into obligation, and awareness into punishment. Beth's mind replays moments she can't change, harsh words to Jerry, impatient sighs towards Summer, dismissive remarks to Morty. Each replay deepens the groove. Guilt convinces her that remembering is the same as repairing. But guilt doesn't fix. It freezes. It keeps her loyal to pain, because pain feels like proof of care. If she ever stopped feeling guilty, wouldn't that mean she stopped loving? There comes a quiet moment, though, when Beth begins to see the cost of her guilt. She notices how often it silences her joy, how it turns laughter into apology, how it keeps her present but never at peace. She realizes that guilt is a form of control, one last illusion that she can still influence what's already happened. It's the emotional version of Rick's scientific obsession. If she can just think hard enough, feel deeply enough, maybe she can rewrite the past. But she can't. And the moment she admits that, guilt begins to lose its power. Forgiveness, when it finally arrives, is not dramatic. It's quiet and clumsy, born in moments that don't even feel redemptive. She forgives Jerry for being who he is. She forgives her father for being who he can't be. Most painfully, she forgives herself for being tired, for wanting to be free from responsibility for a world she didn't create. That forgiveness doesn't erase the guilt, it transforms it. It stops being a punishment and becomes a teacher. Each pang of remorse reminds her of what she values, not what she's ruined. The anatomy of guilt, when understood, reveals something unexpected: compassion. True empathy isn't born from perfection. It's born from imperfection shared. Beth's guilt has made her sharp, but it's also made her kind. She understands fragility because she's lived inside it. When she stops seeing guilt as proof of failure and starts seeing it as evidence of care, she begins to heal. Guilt stops whispering you're wrong and starts whispering you tried. Rick would call that sentimental, and maybe it is. But Beth's sadness has always contained a kind of courage that his cynicism lacks. The courage to feel deeply, without needing logic to justify it. The courage to acknowledge guilt not as a defect, but as a remnant of love. She understands now that guilt is what remains when love has nowhere to go, when it hits the wall of circumstance and turns inward, and she learns, slowly, to redirect it back outward again. to let love flow forward instead of folding in on itself. By the end of this quiet reckoning, Beth is still the same person, still flawed, still striving, still afraid, but she no longer wears guilt like a chain. It becomes a thread instead, connecting her to others, reminding her that care and pain are two sides of the same truth. She stops trying to atone and starts trying to live. Because maybe forgiveness isn't about wiping the slate clean. Maybe it's about accepting that the slate was never supposed to be clean in the first place. And in that acceptance, Beth Smith breathes again, not as the perfect daughter, or the careful mother, or the apologetic wife, but as herself. Still uncertain, still human, but finally at peace with the weight she's carried for so long. Love has never been simple for Beth Smith. It is her most powerful instinct and her most persistent wound, the force that drives her forward and the one that keeps her trapped. She loves fiercely, but her love is heavy, tangled with memory, expectation, and guilt. Every act of affection feels like both an offering and an apology. She gives love not as freedom, but as proof. Proof that she can still care, that she hasn't become as numb as her father, that despite the emptiness she feels, she is still capable of feeling it all. But love, for Beth, has always been something to carry rather than something to rest in. It's the one thing she never learned how to let be light. Her love began as survival. As a child, she loved Rick the way a drowning person loves air, desperately, conditionally, and with an unspoken fear of losing it. His attention was intoxicating, rare, and inconsistent. One moment, he made her feel like the smartest person alive. The next, he disappeared without a word. That rhythm became her blueprint for intimacy. Love meant intensity, followed by absence. Affection meant volatility. The more she tried to hold it, the faster it slipped away. That pattern didn't just shape her, it defined her. When Rick left, love became synonymous with effort. She decided that to be loved, she had to earn it, through competence, through stability, through sacrifice. She learned to make herself useful, to fill the void his absence left by being indispensable to others. It was never about being adored, it was about being needed. Being needed was the closest thing to being safe. That belief followed her into every relationship she ever had, especially with Jerry. Jerry's love was a kind of relief at first. He adored her, admired her, leaned on her. In his dependence, she found her identity confirmed. With him, she could finally be the strong one, the one who stayed when others left. But over time, the comfort turned claustrophobic. His need became a mirror reflecting the hollowness of her own. She began to resent him for the same dependence she once encouraged, not because it changed, but because she did. The love she built on reassurance became a burden, not because Jerry stopped loving her, but because she no longer believed she deserved to be loved so easily. Beth's love for her children is more complex still. It's pure, but it's conditional in ways she doesn't like to admit. She loves them more than anything, yet her love is threaded with fear, fear of failing them, fear of shaping them into reflections of herself, fear of being the reason they someday sit in silence wondering who they are. Every act of care becomes a balancing act between nurture and projection. She wants to protect them from the chaos of her upbringing, but in doing so, she sometimes passes that chaos down, disguised as structure. Her love is not controlling because she wants power. It's controlling because she's terrified of losing what she loves. The heaviest part of Beth's love, though, is how aware she is of its contradictions. She knows she can be cruel to the people she loves. She knows she withholds tenderness when she feels unworthy of it. She knows she expects love to fix what it was never meant to. That awareness doesn't stop her from repeating the patterns. It just adds another layer of sadness to them. Every time she lashes out at Jerry or scolds her children too sharply, she feels the weight of it before the words even land. Love becomes a constant apology, a wound that never stops bleeding because she keeps reopening it to check if it's healing. Rick's version of love haunts her in a different way. His love is buried beneath sarcasm and superiority, hidden so deep it often looks like indifference. Yet she can feel it in flashes, the hesitation before he insults her, the small gestures that contradict his words. He loves her in his own broken way, and that might be the cruelest thing of all, because it keeps her hoping. It keeps her trying to decode his affection, to find meaning in his mockery. She keeps loving him because she believes there's something redemptive in understanding him. But every time she gets close, he retreats. Rick's love is a locked room with a window that only opens from the outside, and Beth, for all her intelligence, keeps standing on the wrong side of it. Love, to Beth, feels less like connection and more like endurance. It's something she holds until it hurts, something she overanalyzes until it loses its shape. When someone says they love her, she can't just believe it. She has to prove it, test it, question it. She doesn't trust affection that comes without effort, because effort is all she's ever known. And yet, beneath all the anxiety, there's a quiet truth she can't ignore. Her love, however flawed, is real. It's the one thing in her life that isn't a performance. Even when she misuses it, it comes from a place of sincerity. Over time, she begins to realize that the weight of love isn't in the feeling itself, but in the expectations attached to it. She's spent her entire life treating love like a job, something to maintain, measure, and manage. But love, real love, doesn't ask for control, it asks for surrender. That lesson comes slowly, in moments she doesn't plan for. A conversation that doesn't end in blame. A hug she doesn't rush. A night when she doesn't need to be right. These small mercies teach her that love doesn't always have to fix something. Sometimes it just needs to be shared. There's a particular kind of love that Beth begins to rediscover, love without purpose. The kind that doesn't come from guilt or obligation, but from presence. It happens when she sits beside Jerry and feels quiet gratitude instead of frustration. When she watches Summer's confidence bloom and feels pride without fear. When Morty makes a mistake and she doesn't correct him, just lets him be human. These are not grand gestures, they're acts of release. Each one lightens the weight of love she's carried for so long. The moment Beth begins to love without control, she starts to understand her father differently. Rick's problem was never that he couldn't love, it was that he refused to. Love terrified him because it meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant loss. Beth spent years making the same mistake in reverse, clinging to love so tightly that she strangled it. Where Rick avoided connection, she overprotected it. Both were strategies against pain. Both failed. And in that realization, she finds compassion for him and for herself. The weight of love will never vanish for Beth. She is too aware, too self-critical, too haunted by the patterns she inherited. But it becomes lighter when she stops demanding that love make her whole. It doesn't have to fix her, or save her, or define her. It only has to exist. She begins to see that love's value lies not in what it changes, but in what it endures. The world around her, chaotic, absurd, full of contradictions, continues to shift. But her capacity to care within it becomes her quiet form of rebellion. At night, when she looks at her family, she doesn't see perfection. She sees fragments, scars, little moments of connection. She sees the mess, the noise, the laughter that never quite sounds smooth, and for the first time, she doesn't want to fix it. She just wants to be part of it. The love she carries is still heavy, but now it feels like gravity rather than burden, something that keeps her grounded, something that reminds her she belongs. And maybe that's all love ever needed to be for Beth Smith. Not a test of worth, not a cure for emptiness, but proof that even in a broken world, connection is still possible. The weight remains, but it no longer crushes her. It holds her in place. It reminds her she's real. Every life that touches Rick Sanchez is marked by him, but none more deeply than Beth's. He isn't just her father, he's her mythology. He's the invisible architect of her fears, her standards, her sense of worth. Even when he's gone, his presence hums like radiation, unseen but everywhere. Beth's entire identity has been shaped in opposition to him, in imitation of him, and, most tragically, in defense against him. She lives inside his shadow, not because she chooses to, but because she doesn't know where the light would fall without it. Rick's shadow is not darkness, it's distortion. It bends Beth's perception of everything, of love, of intelligence, of herself. To her, Rick is both God and ghost. He's proof that brilliance can exist and that it can ruin everything it touches. He's the measure by which she judges her own strength, the standard she never asked for but can't stop reaching toward. Rick made the universe smaller by understanding it too well, and Beth inherited that same curse on a smaller scale. She understands her world too deeply to ever fully belong to it. The shadow of Rick began in her childhood. His absences were louder than his words, and his rare moments of affection became sacred relics. When he left, he didn't just abandon his daughter. He left her with the unbearable awareness that genius and love are not the same. She grew up trying to merge the two, to prove that she could be both brilliant and good, both her father's child and her own person. But the more she succeeded, the less satisfied she became. His voice, sarcastic, condescending, omnipresent, lived in her head long before he reappeared in her life. When he finally returned, his presence didn't fill the emptiness, it confirmed it. Beth had spent years building herself into someone who could stand on her own, but standing in front of him made her feel small again. Every compliment felt like a calculation, every insult, a test. She wanted his Bethesbent investee.com approval, even though she despised what that meant. Rick's love, like everything about him, is unstable. It flickers between pride and contempt, between closeness and withdrawal. And Beth, trapped in his orbit, learns the cruel rhythm of dependency all over again. What makes Rick's shadow so powerful is that it doesn't demand belief, it creates it. Beth's mind has been trained to see through his eyes. When she succeeds, she hears his skepticism. So what? When she fails, she hears his mockery. I told you so. His logic infects her empathy. She starts to treat her own emotions like weaknesses to be solved, not experienced. Even her compassion becomes analytical, an exercise in understanding rather than feeling. She's inherited not just his intelligence, but his detachment. The tragedy is that she sees it happening and can't stop it. Jerry, in his own small way, becomes her rebellion against the shadow. By loving someone Rick would never respect, she asserts a kind of independence. But even that act of defiance is shaped by Rick's presence. Her marriage becomes less about love and more about resistance, a protest against her father's worldview. When she feels close to Jerry, she feels like she's escaping Rick. When she grows frustrated, she feels like she's proving him right. There's no winning, because both paths lead back to him. Beth's relationship with Rick is built on recognition, the painful kind that sees too much. She knows what drives him because it drives her too. The terror of insignificance. Rick's genius isn't ambition, it's obsession. It's the same hunger she feels in quieter ways, the need to matter, to control, to understand. The difference is that Rick has stripped away the illusion of morality. He knows that meaning is an invention and that knowledge has hollowed him out. Beth isn't ready to face that truth completely, so she clings to the fragments of purpose he discarded, but she feels the same vacuum pulling at her. She just refuses to name it. There's a cruel paradox in loving someone like Rick. To love him is to acknowledge that he cannot return it in the way you need. His affection, when it appears, comes wrapped in ridicule. His respect comes only when you mirror his cynicism. And yet, Beth keeps reaching for him, because understanding him feels like the closest thing to being seen. She doesn't want to fix him. Though part of her believes she can, she just wants him to admit that he feels something, that all the chaos and cruelty are defenses, not truths. But Rick doesn't admit anything. He never will. And so, Beth's love becomes another experiment in futility. But even within the shadow, there are moments of clarity. Rick's existence teaches Beth a kind of brutal honesty. He forces her to confront illusions. The illusion of perfection, of control, of simple morality. He strips the world of comfort, and in that exposure, she learns to find meaning without guarantees. His cruelty becomes an education in resilience. By surviving him, she learns how to survive herself. The shadow that once crushed her becomes, in time, a map, a guide to understanding what she refuses to become. Beth's greatest evolution is realizing that Rick's shadow doesn't disappear. It fades only when she stops standing still. The more she defines herself by opposition, the more she remains in his orbit. Freedom doesn't come from fighting him, it comes from outgrowing the need to. She begins to see that she doesn't have to prove she's as strong, as smart, or as fearless as him. She doesn't need to win the comparison, because the comparison itself is the trap. Rick's shadow isn't a person, it's a perspective. It only exists as long as she believes his way of seeing the world is the only valid one. One day, perhaps without realizing it, Beth starts to make choices that don't reference him. Small things at first. An opinion not filtered through. His approval. A decision not measured by his logic. She begins to act, not as her father's daughter, but as herself. The change is subtle, invisible to him, but profound for her. The moment she stops seeking his validation, his shadow loses its shape. He becomes just a man, broken, brilliant, lonely, and she, finally, becomes more than his reflection. Rick will never understand the freedom Beth finds in that. He doesn't believe in freedom that isn't defiance, but Beth does. She discovers that you can inherit pain without inheriting perspective. You can understand where your wounds come from without letting them define your shape. The shadow remains, it always will, but it no longer blocks the light. It moves beside her instead, a reminder, not a master. In the end, Beth doesn't conquer her father, she accepts him. Acceptance doesn't mean forgiveness. It means acknowledgement, the understanding that Rick is exactly who he is, and that his brokenness is not a prophecy for her own. The moment she stops trying to fix him, she stops needing to be fixed herself. She realizes that his sadness is his own creation, and her task is not to inherit it, but to transcend it. Rick's shadow will always stretch long across her life, but it no longer defines its boundaries. She steps into her own space, imperfect and unfinished, and for the first time, she doesn't look back to see if he's watching. The light feels strange at first, unfamiliar, even undeserved, but she stands in it anyway, because freedom, for Beth Smith, was never about leaving her father behind. It was about learning to exist in her own gravity, no longer orbiting someone else's pain. Beth Smith lives between versions of herself, not metaphorically, but almost literally. Somewhere in the vast absurdity of her father's genius, there are two Beths, one who stayed and one who left, one who chose the comfort of family and one who chose the freedom of space. The tragedy isn't that there are two of her, it's that both are incomplete. Each Beth carries the same restlessness, the same ache for identity, the same unspoken suspicion that no version of her will ever feel entirely whole. The duality of Beth Smith isn't science fiction, it's biography. Her clone is only the mirror of what's always existed inside her, the split between who she is and who she thinks she should have been. The moment Rick offered her the choice to stay or to go, to live or to explore, he wasn't just playing God, he was exposing her fracture. He forced her to confront the question she had been avoiding her entire life. What does she really want? Freedom or belonging? Chaos or safety? Herself or her family? And like most impossible questions, the answer was both. She wanted all of it, and the shame of that desire carved another fault line through her. The clone, whichever one she is not a copy. She's the physical embodiment of Beth's divided soul. The Beth who stayed tries to convince herself that she made the right decision. She looks at her children, at Jerry, at the fragile peace she maintains, and tells herself this is fulfillment. But there's always a flicker of envy when she looks at the stars, a quiet resentment that whispers, "I could have been more." She suppresses it, disguising it as contentment, but it lives under her skin like static. The Beth who left, meanwhile, faces the opposite curse. She has infinite horizons, adventure, autonomy, yet she feels the same emptiness in a different shape. She wanted freedom from the weight of family, but freedom without connection only echoes. Both Beths are trapped in the same truth. You can escape the circumstances of your life, but not the architecture of your heart. The duality of self has always defined Beth. Even before the clone, she lived in contradictions, confident and insecure, nurturing and cruel, rational and impulsive. She loves deeply, but fears dependence. She's brilliant, but restless. She seeks validation, but despises needing it. This internal tension is what makes her human, but she experiences it as failure. She believes peace means choosing one side, committing to a single version of herself, when in reality, peace is the ability to hold both. Rick's technology gave her body a duplicate, but her mind had already done that years ago. The clone is just evidence of how fractured identity feels when your life has been shaped by other people's expectations. Rick's science turned metaphor into matter, but the confusion was already there. Beth has always been two people, the daughter of chaos and the architect of control, the dreamer and the realist, the healer and the wound. She oscillates between extremes because she doesn't trust the middle ground. Balance feels like weakness to her. Compromise feels like surrender. But wholeness isn't about choosing sides. It's about accepting the space between them. The relationship between the two Beths, when they finally meet, is painfully tender. They don't fight. They don't argue about who's real. They recognize each other instantly because they've always known each other. Each carries what the other lacks. The one who stayed has roots but no wings. The one who left has wings but no ground. Together they form the outline of something almost complete. It's not a reconciliation, it's a realization. The other Beth isn't competition. She's proof that neither choice could have saved her from herself. She needed both versions to understand that identity is not a destination, it's an ecosystem. The duality also forces Beth to reevaluate her father. Rick's cruelty in creating the clone wasn't just another act of manipulation. It was a strange, accidental act of honesty. He made her face what he's been running from his whole life, the impossibility of being one thing. Rick hides from his contradictions in infinite universes. Beth now sees them living inside her. Where he externalized fragmentation, she internalized it. But in a way, that gives her an advantage. She doesn't need to travel the multiverse to understand herself. She just has to look inward. Her marriage to Jerry becomes another arena for duality. The Beth who stayed loves him, but part of her resents him for anchoring her. The Beth who left forgets him, but part of her misses the safety his presence gave her. Love, for her, exists as paradox, both comfort and confinement. She realizes that what she wanted from Jerry was never rescue, but reflection. She wanted to see the part of herself that could still believe in simplicity. The clone doesn't solve that, it amplifies it. Now, when she thinks of love, she wonders whether it was ever meant to feel whole. Maybe love, like identity, is supposed to stay unfinished. The duality of self eventually becomes a kind of liberation. Once Beth stops searching for the real version of herself, she begins to live more freely. She sees that identity isn't static. It shifts with every choice, every contradiction, every reconciliation between who she was and who she's becoming. The two Beths aren't rivals, they're rhythms. One expands, one contracts. One explores, one preserves. Together, they represent the full shape of being alive, movement and memory, chaos and care, distance and return. Rick, predictably, tries to reduce their duality to logic. He treats it like a philosophical experiment, an outcome to be analysed. But Beth sees what he can't, that identity is not about logic. It's about mercy. The mercy of allowing yourself to contain contradictions without punishment. The mercy of admitting that you can be brave and afraid, strong and uncertain, selfish and loving, all at once. The clone isn't a mistake. It's a confession, proof that Beth has always been more than one thing, and that's not weakness, that's humanity. In the quiet moments, when she imagines the other version of herself, Beth doesn't feel jealousy anymore. She feels kinship. She imagines that somewhere out there, her other self is looking back at the stars, thinking the same thought. Not envy, not regret, but understanding. They don't need to choose between each other, because both are fragments of the same whole, two sides of a mind learning to forgive itself for being divided. The duality of Beth Smith is not a glitch to be fixed. It's the truth of every person who has ever stood between longing and loyalty, between who they are and who they dream of being. Beth's tragedy is not that she was cloned, it's that she believed she needed to be whole. But by embracing her multiplicity, she discovers something Rick never did, that selfhood isn't about collapsing contradictions, it's about holding them until they make sense together. When she finally looks in the mirror, she doesn't see one Beth or the other. She sees both, the one who stayed and the one who left, the one who loves and the one who runs, the one who builds and the one who destroys. For the first time, the reflection doesn't frighten her. It comforts her. Because now she knows that wholeness was never about singularity. It was about harmony. And in that quiet understanding, the two Beths, inside and out, finally rest together in the same space. Freedom, for Beth Smith, has never been about escape. It's about weight. the weight of responsibility, of legacy, of love. Every decision she's ever made has carried gravity, and freedom, she learns, isn't the absence of that pull. It's learning how to move while carrying it. The cost of freedom is not loss, it's loneliness. To be free, truly free, is to accept that no one else can decide who you are, and that realization, while liberating, also isolates. Beth knows this better than most. She's lived both sides of the equation, the Beth who stayed and the Beth who left. Both gained freedom in one form and paid for it in another. For the Beth who stayed, freedom costs identity. Every day she wakes up and performs the role she built for herself. Mother, wife, caretaker, the anchor of a family held together by tension. She loves her family, but part of her wonders what it would feel like to live without them defining her, to have desires that don't orbit her father's chaos or Jerry's fragility. Her freedom is internal, hidden in thoughts she never speaks aloud. Sometimes she lets herself imagine walking away, not out of resentment, but out of curiosity, to see who she'd become without the context of anyone else. The fact that she never doesn't make her weak. It just proves that her love, even when it traps her, is real. But the cost of that love is that her freedom will always feel slightly imagined, never fully lived. The Beth who left paid the opposite price. She found the kind of freedom her other self dreamed of, the vast silence of space, the endless horizon of choice. No obligations, no expectations, no one to answer to. She became a version of Rick without the cruelty, inventive, reckless, unbound. But the silence she once craved eventually began to echo. Freedom, in its purest form, doesn't erase loneliness, it amplifies it. The more she drifted from home, the more she realized that independence without intimacy isn't liberation, it's exile. She escaped her father's shadow, only to discover that she had brought it with her, carried in memory, in instinct, in the way she hesitated before forming new attachments. The cost of her freedom was belonging. Both Beths, in their separate lives, learn the same truth from opposite directions. Freedom is not a prize, it's a trade. It asks for something in return: connection, certainty, peace. You can have all the choices in the universe, but you can't have them without consequence. The freedom to become anyone includes the freedom to feel lost, the freedom to miss what you left behind. Rick has lived this truth for decades, though he refuses to admit it. His freedom, limitless as it is, has stripped him of everything that once gave it meaning. He has infinite worlds, but no home. And in that sense, both Beths are walking the same path he did, just with more awareness. For the Beth who stayed, Rick's reappearance became a reminder of the freedom she never claimed. For the Beth who left, Rick became a warning of what freedom without connection becomes. Both are reflections of his tragedy, but both carry something he doesn't: the willingness to feel regret. Rick sees regret as weakness, but Beth begins to see it as proof of depth. To feel sorrow for what you've lost means you've loved something real. That's not a flaw, it's humanity. The cost of freedom also appears in smaller, more personal ways. For Beth, it's in the moments she realizes that no one can make her happy except herself, and that this truth is both empowering and unbearable. It means she can't blame Rick forever. It means Jerry can't complete her. It means her children will someday leave, and she'll have to live with the quiet that follows. Freedom means ownership, and ownership means responsibility. There's no one left to project onto when you finally admit that you're the one shaping your life. Her father once told her that meaning is just a chemical illusion, that life has no design except the one we create. She used to reject that as cynicism, now she understands it differently. Meaning may be self-made, but that doesn't make it less real. It just makes it fragile. And freedom is the space where that fragility reveals itself. Every choice carries risk. Every independence carries uncertainty. Beth learns to live with that tension. Freedom stops being a fantasy of escape and becomes a practice of honesty. The willingness to admit that she is both grateful and afraid, fulfilled and unfulfilled, grounded and restless. Jerry's presence complicates that practice. He doesn't understand her hunger for autonomy. To him, love and freedom are opposites. But for Beth, they've always been intertwined. Love without freedom feels like suffocation. Freedom without love feels like emptiness. She doesn't want to choose between them anymore. She wants to build a life that allows both, not perfectly, but truthfully, and sometimes that means letting Jerry fail, letting herself fail, letting the people she loves learn how to live without her control. It's terrifying, but it's also the closest she's ever been to real connection. The cost of freedom is that it doesn't end loneliness, it transforms it. Instead of fearing the emptiness, Beth begins to see it as space, room to grow, to breathe, to exist without justification. The silence she once dreaded becomes a companion. She learns to listen to it without panic, to let it speak. It tells her that she doesn't have to be extraordinary to be complete, that she doesn't have to keep proving her worth through others, that her freedom doesn't need to look like escape, it can look like stillness. Rick will never understand that kind of freedom. To him, stillness is stagnation. But Beth is beginning to learn that stillness is strength, that real autonomy isn't in motion, but in choice, the choice to stay, to care, to remain aware without being consumed by it. Freedom, for her, is no longer rebellion. It's balance. It's the quiet act of belonging to herself in a world that never taught her how. The final cost of freedom, perhaps, is acceptance. Accepting that no version of life is complete, that every choice closes another door. That being human means carrying both the longing for what could be and the gratitude for what is. Beth's two selves, the one who stayed and the one who left, are no longer opposites. They are witnesses. Each understands the other's price. Each envies and pities the other. And in that mutual recognition lies the reconciliation that Rick never found. The understanding that freedom and connection are not enemies, but partners. When Beth looks at her life now, she doesn't measure it by what she's gained or lost. She measures it by what she can live with, the compromises she can forgive, the contradictions she can hold without breaking. Freedom, she realizes, is not about getting everything you want. It's about learning to live with the fact that you can't. And that lesson, though it costs her everything she once believed about herself, gives her the one thing she never had before: peace. Forgiveness, for Beth Smith, was never part of her vocabulary. It always sounded like surrender, like letting someone else win. Her world was built on control, on precision, on the illusion that pain could be avoided if you just never let go. But control can't coexist with forgiveness. Forgiveness requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is the one thing Beth has always feared more than failure. For years, she treated forgiveness like weakness, a betrayal of intelligence, a luxury for people who don't see how cruel the world really is. But in time, she learns that forgiveness isn't forgetting or excusing. It's understanding without needing to keep fighting. Forgiveness begins, for Beth, not with her father or Jerry, but with herself. It starts in exhaustion. There comes a point where the constant self-scrutiny, the guilt, the striving, all collapse under their own weight. She looks at her life, the arguments that never end, the achievements that never satisfy, the love that always feels conditional, and realizes that she's been punishing herself for things she didn't cause. She's been carrying her father's choices, her husband's fragility, her children's confusion, as if they were debts she owed the universe. Forgiveness begins when she finally admits she's tired, not broken, not defeated, just tired of holding on to the illusion that pain gives meaning. The first person Beth forgives is the little girl she used to be, the one who waited by the window for her father, who believed that love could fix abandonment. For years, she despised that version of herself, saw her as naive, needy, weak. But now she sees that the child wasn't foolish, she was hopeful. Hope, she realizes, isn't stupidity, it's the first language of love. Forgiving that child means acknowledging that the longing to be loved was not her flaw, it was her humanity. Forgiveness of Rick comes next, though it doesn't arrive in a single moment. There's no dramatic reconciliation, no apology that redeems him. Rick doesn't change, he rarely does. But Beth changes how she sees him. She stops waiting for him to be the father she deserved and starts accepting him as the man he is. He's brilliant, cruel, broken, and incapable of sustaining the intimacy he accidentally creates. She forgives him not because he asks for it, but because she no longer wants to keep carrying him inside her anger. Forgiveness, for Beth, becomes an act of release, not absolution. It doesn't make Rick better, it makes her free. Jerry's forgiveness is softer, almost invisible. It happens through routine, through patience, through the slow return of trust that doesn't need grand gestures. She stops trying to reshape him into the man she imagined when they first met. She lets him be small, clumsy, sincere. She sees that his love was never meant to save her, it was meant to accompany her. She forgives him for not being Rick, and she forgives herself forever, expecting him to be. Their love doesn't become perfect, but it becomes honest. Forgiveness turns their tension into texture, proof that imperfection can coexist with affection. Forgiveness of herself takes longer. It's the most difficult kind, because it requires her to accept the parts she still doesn't like, the sharpness, the control, the impatience, the pride. She learns that forgiveness doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means sitting beside who you are and choosing not to flinch. She no longer treats self-awareness as punishment. She starts to see it as intimacy, the ability to look at herself without judgment. Her flaws don't disappear, but they stop defining her. Forgiveness gives her permission to be unfinished. Beth's relationship with forgiveness mirrors her relationship with love, complex, conditional, but ultimately redemptive. Each act of forgiveness makes her softer without making her weaker. She begins to see that intelligence and compassion are not opposites. She can understand her pain without letting it dictate her worth. She can analyze her father's failures without inheriting them. Forgiveness doesn't erase history. It reframes it. It turns every wound into evidence of endurance. Rick doesn't know how to forgive himself. Not really, but Beth starts to understand why. To forgive yourself, you have to believe that your value isn't tied to your mistakes. And Rick has built his entire identity on the idea that everything has a cost. To him, forgiveness feels like cheating. But Beth begins to see forgiveness as evolution, as the mind learning what the heart already knows, that not everything broken needs to be repaired. Some things just need to be accepted. There's a quiet evening when Beth finds herself sitting with Rick, not arguing, not analyzing, just sitting. The silence between them feels different, not heavy, but full. She realizes that forgiveness has changed the way she perceives him. He's not the villain, or the hero of her story anymore. He's just another human being, damaged, terrified, trying. That realization doesn't erase the years of neglect or the pain he caused, but it dissolves the need for vengeance. She can love him without expecting him to heal her. That, she realizes, is what forgiveness looks like. Not reconciliation, but peace without resolution. Forgiveness also shifts how Beth sees the universe. She begins to understand that life isn't a moral equation where every wrong must be balanced. It's a collection of attempts, of near misses, of half-hearted apologies and small mercies. To forgive the world is to stop demanding that it make sense. To accept that chaos doesn't need to be corrected to be lived in. Rick sees existence as meaningless because he can't forgive it for not being perfect. Beth learns to forgive existence itself for being messy, for being unpredictable, for being exactly what it is. Forgiveness changes her relationship with time. She stops looking backward for explanations and forward for redemption. She learns to live in the present, in the ordinary. The smallest things, a conversation that doesn't end in blame, a meal shared in silence, a laugh that isn't forced, become moments of grace. Forgiveness isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It lives in the quiet decision to stop punishing yourself for being alive. In the end, forgiveness doesn't make Beth happier. It makes her lighter. It removes the need for control, for certainty, for closure. It allows her to breathe inside the chaos instead of trying to escape it. Forgiveness becomes her philosophy, not as an answer, but as a way of staying kind in a world that never promised kindness in return. When she looks at Rick now, she doesn't see a shadow. When she looks at Jerry, she doesn't see disappointment. When she looks at herself, she doesn't see failure. She sees continuance, the slow, imperfect motion of someone still learning, still loving, still choosing to forgive. That, she realizes, is what survival actually means. Not escaping pain, but refusing to turn it into punishment. Forgiveness has no shape because it doesn't stay still. It shifts, like Beth herself, changing, evolving, reflecting whatever it touches. It's not the end of her sadness, but the end of her self-blame. It's the moment she finally looks at her life, with all its fractures and contradictions, and says softly, "It's enough." Redemption has never been dramatic for Beth Smith. It doesn't arrive with revelations or apologies. It doesn't wait for music or closure. It comes quietly, almost invisibly, in the moments when she stops trying to prove herself. Redemption, for Beth, isn't about being forgiven by others. It's about forgiving herself enough to start living. It's the point where all her contradictions stop feeling like evidence of failure and start feeling like the shape of a full life. For most of her life, Beth thought redemption meant transformation. She believed she had to become someone different, less angry, less proud, less like her father, to earn peace. But transformation never came. No amount of control or love or understanding could erase the patterns she inherited. Redemption doesn't come from becoming someone new. It comes from finally seeing who you are without flinching. And when she does, she realizes that maybe the point was never to outgrow her father or her flaws. Maybe it was to live with them gracefully. Rick's version of redemption has always been self-destruction. Every time he feels guilt or tenderness, he tries to kill it. He mocks sentiment. He hides behind intellect. He destroys what he can't fix. Beth recognizes that impulse in herself, the need to preempt pain before it finds you. For years, she armored herself with perfection and cynicism, the way he armors himself with science. They both treated vulnerability like disease, But redemption, she learns, isn't found in armor. It's found in the moments you set it down and realize the world doesn't shatter without it. Beth's redemption begins when she stops performing strength, when she lets herself be ordinary. There's a day when she admits she doesn't have the answers, when she apologizes to Summer without turning it into a lesson, when she lets Jerry comfort her instead of resisting it. Small, unremarkable gestures, but each one is an act of reclamation. For the first time, her life stops being a test. She doesn't need to be extraordinary. She just needs to be kind. Redemption, she realizes, is built from moments that don't need to be witnessed. Her quiet redemption also lives in the way she begins to see Rick differently. Not as a god or a monster, but as a man. She doesn't need to fix him anymore. She doesn't even need him to change. She sees his sadness clearly, and instead of taking it personally, she lets it belong to him. That's the difference between pity and compassion. Pity tries to save people. Compassion lets them exist. In that acceptance, she finally breaks the cycle, the inheritance of guilt, of proving, of needing to be more. She can love Rick without becoming him. Jerry, too, becomes part of her redemption in ways neither of them expect. Their marriage doesn't become romantic or perfect. It becomes real. They stop mistaking each other's weakness for betrayal. They begin to share the same silence without fear. Jerry's love no longer feels like a trap. It feels like a mirror. He's not the solution to her sadness, but he's proof that life can be lived even inside it. Redemption doesn't mean finding happiness. It means no longer needing to escape your life to believe it's worth living. Beth's redemption also unfolds through her children. For years, she tried to mold them into what she thought strength should look like. But as they grow, she sees them forming their own shapes, flawed, defiant, alive, and instead of controlling it, she starts to celebrate it. Summer's independence doesn't threaten her anymore. Morty's mistakes don't disappoint her. She sees herself in both of them, the yearning, the confusion, the courage to keep feeling in a world that rewards numbness. She realizes her redemption isn't about being a perfect parent. It's about letting her children grow without inheriting her fear of imperfection. The redemption she finds is not divine or moral. It's practical, emotional, human. It's the slow return of softness after years of armor. It's the ability to say, "I don't know," without shame. It's the moment she stops interpreting peace as stagnation. It's the quiet laughter that escapes when she realizes how much energy she spent trying to control the uncontrollable. It's the evening she sits at the kitchen table, surrounded by imperfection, and feels no urgency to fix any of it. The peace she was chasing was always there. It just needed her permission to exist. Rick notices the change, even if he never admits it. He sees that she no longer takes his bait, no longer seeks his approval, no longer mirrors his cynicism. It unnerves him. In his own way, he respects her for it, even if he'll never say so. For the first time, he has to face a version of Beth who is immune to the emotional gravity that has defined their relationship. Her redemption doesn't make her better than him. It just makes her whole in a way he refuses to be. Beth's redemption is quiet because it's internal. The world doesn't reward it. There's no applause, no validation. No one else even notices. But that's what makes it sacred. It's the kind of redemption that doesn't need witnesses because it isn't about proof. It's about peace. It's about learning to coexist with your contradictions without trying to erase them. She stops running from the parts of herself that look like Rick and instead learns to tend to them gently. The same intelligence that once made her cold now makes her kind. The same pride that once made her distant now makes her resilient. Redemption, Beth learns, doesn't mean you stop hurting. It means the pain stops feeling like a punishment. It stops defining you. It becomes background noise, the hum of a life still in motion. She doesn't need to be forgiven by the universe, because she finally understands there was never anything to forgive. She was always doing the best she could with what she had. A father who couldn't love without cruelty. A husband who loved without confidence. A world that demanded strength without softness. Redemption is what happens when you stop confusing survival with failure. In the stillness that follows, Beth feels something she hasn't felt since childhood. Not joy, not relief, but presence. The sense of being exactly where she is, without needing to be anywhere else. The quiet redemption of Beth Smith isn't a climax. It's a continuation. It's the moment she learns that life doesn't have to be rewritten to be worth living. It only has to be seen clearly and forgiven gently, one breath at a time. The meaning of Beth Smith is not found in her intelligence, her accomplishments, or even her pain. It lives in her persistence, the quiet, relentless decision to keep being herself, even when she doesn't know who that is. She has spent her life asking questions that have no answers. What makes me enough? What makes me different from him? What do I owe to love, to family, to freedom? For years, she mistook those questions for failures. Now she understands they were the point, meaning for Beth was never something waiting at the end of the journey. It was the act of asking, again and again, with honesty. Beth's life is a study in contradictions. She is the daughter of a man who sees the universe as meaningless, yet she refuses to stop searching for meaning. She is a mother who loves deeply, but not always gently. She is a woman divided between versions of herself, the one who stayed and the one who left, yet somehow both are true. In another world, she might have chosen one path and called it peace. But Beth's meaning is not in simplicity, it's in coexistence. She is the proof that a person can be made of contradictions without being broken by them. Rick has spent his life proving that nothing matters. Beth has spent hers proving that everything does, even when it hurts. That difference is the quiet rebellion that defines her. She is the counterpoint to his cynicism, the one who takes the same knowledge and finds compassion instead of despair. Rick's genius builds walls. Beth's awareness builds bridges. He runs from connection because it reminds him of his limits. She seeks connection because it reminds her she's still human. Her meaning exists in what she refuses to surrender. Empathy in the face of absurdity. Love in the face of futility. The meaning of Beth is not redemption. It's recognition. She finally sees herself not as her father's daughter, or her husband's anchor, or her children's guide, but as her own constellation, complex, incomplete, and radiant in her imperfection. She understands now that identity isn't a verdict, it's an ongoing conversation. Every mistake, every outburst, every quiet act of care adds another voice to that dialogue. She no longer chases perfection because she sees what it costs. She chooses presence instead. Freedom, for Beth, no longer means escape. It means belonging to herself. She doesn't need to leave to prove she's independent, and she doesn't need to stay to prove she's loyal. She can love Jerry without being defined by him. She can forgive Rick without excusing him. She can raise her children without turning them into replicas of her own fear. The meaning of Beth is the realization that wholeness isn't the absence of contradiction. It's the ability to hold it without resentment. Her meaning also exists in the way she chooses to see the world. Rick looks at existence and sees chaos. Beth looks at the same chaos and sees connection. Where he sees randomness, she sees responsibility. Where he finds futility, she finds the fragile beauty of care. She knows she can't fix the universe, but she can tend to her corner of it. The same mind that once obsessed over control now finds peace in maintenance. A house that isn't perfect but lived in. A family that isn't flawless but still shows up. There's a scene in Beth's life, quiet, ordinary, invisible to anyone else, that captures this meaning. She's sitting at the kitchen table. The light is low. The house is imperfectly still. There's a cup of coffee cooling beside her. Rick's voice is somewhere in the background. Jerry is humming off-key. Summer and Morty are arguing softly upstairs. It's not harmony, not peace, but it's alive. And for the first time, Beth feels no need to analyze it. She doesn't think about what it means, what it costs, or what comes next. She just feels it. That is her meaning. The ability to stay present in a world that never stops spinning. Beth's meaning also lies in what she gives back, not through grand gestures, but through awareness. She raises her children with honesty rather than illusion. She loves Jerry with clarity instead of dependence. She faces her father without fear, not because he's changed, but because she no longer needs him to. She exists as proof that self-awareness doesn't have to lead to despair. It can lead to tenderness. The knowledge that everything is fragile doesn't make her bitter. It makes her gentle. Rick, in his own way, begins to understand her meaning too. He won't say it, of course. He'll mock her for being sentimental, call her naive. But somewhere deep beneath the sarcasm, he knows she's right. She's found a kind of peace that intelligence alone can't provide. He sees it in her steadiness, in the way she no longer mirrors his chaos. Her meaning becomes a quiet reflection of what he's lost, a version of brilliance that doesn't destroy itself. The meaning of Beth is not found in success or wisdom. It's in endurance. The endurance to feel without fleeing, to stay when it's easier to run, to care when indifference feels safer. Her strength was never about control, it was about persistence. To wake up, to show up, to keep trying. That's her philosophy now. It's small, but it's honest. And in a universe where everything eventually falls apart, honesty might be the closest thing to meaning there is. Beth's story isn't a redemption arc or a tragedy. It's a mirror for her father, for her family, for anyone who's ever tried to make sense of being alive. She reflects the universal paradox. That awareness hurts, but it's also what makes love possible. To see the flaws in everything and still choose to care is the highest form of strength. Rick runs from that truth. Beth lives in it. That's what separates them, and that's what makes her matter. At the end of it all, Beth doesn't find answers. She doesn't need them anymore. She looks at her life, the fractures, the laughter, the quiet nights that stretch into thought, and sees not chaos, but continuity. She understands that she was never supposed to escape her reflection. She was supposed to accept it. The meaning of Beth Smith is acceptance of her father, her family, her fears, and, finally, herself. She stands at the window one last time, the stars scattered above like unfinished thoughts. Somewhere out there, another version of her is still searching. But this one, right here, is still. Not because she's solved anything, but because she's learned how to live without needing to. The meaning of Beth is the meaning of being human, to know that the universe doesn't owe you peace, and to love it anyway.